The House of Horrors. How could a mother conceal 5 pregnancies and live among the remains of her own children? The quiet streets of Blackstone, Massachusetts, seemed like an ideal place to raise a family, suburban, peaceful, and unassuming. It was the kind of neighborhood where children played in backyards and neighbors exchanged pleasantries over freshly mowed lawns. But on a humid afternoon in August 2014, a frantic call shattered the calm facade. Betsy Brown, a local mother, was folding laundry when her 10-year-old son rushed into the room, his face pale and voice shaking. He had been playing at their neighbor Erika Murray's house when he heard the unmistakable cries of a baby. "There's a baby there, Mom," he blurted out, wide-eyed, "but it's crying, and it looks sick." Alarmed by his urgency, Betsy dropped the laundry basket and hurried to Erika's modest 2-story home. She had always thought of the house as slightly run down, but nothing out of the ordinary. As she stepped onto the porch, a wave of stench hit her, thick, sour, and suffocating. It was unlike anything she had ever smelled before. Her unease grew as she knocked on the door and was met with silence, save for the faint, desperate cries of an infant inside. Pushing the door open, Betsy was unprepared for what awaited her. The interior was dim, with blankets shrouding the windows. Trash was piled to the ceiling in some places, blocking pathways through the rooms. Bugs scurried over rotting food, and the floors glistened with filth. But what struck her most were the handprints, small, smudged outlines pressed into layers of grime on the walls. The soft sound of crying led her to a back room, where she found 2 young girls, one a baby, the other barely a toddler. Both were filthy, their hair tangled, their skeletal frames trembling with fear and hunger. Betsy's chest tightened as she pulled out her phone to call 911, her hands trembling. "There are children in here," she whispered to the operator, tears streaming down her face. "They're alive, but just barely." The arrival of police and emergency responders turned the sleepy neighborhood into a scene of chaos. Officers, visibly shaken by the conditions, carried the children out of the house. Investigators in hazmat suits began cataloging the home's contents. It wasn't long before the horror deepened. Hidden in 2 separate closets, officers discovered the skeletal remains of 3 infants, their tiny bodies wrapped in fabric and left to decompose in the squalor. The discovery shocked Blackstone, drawing national attention to what the media soon dubbed the House of Horrors. As investigators worked to uncover the truth about what had happened within those walls, one question lingered in everyone's minds. How could something so horrifying have gone unnoticed for so long? Erika Murray's story. Erika Murray, the woman at the center of the horror, seemed an unlikely figure to be tied to such a harrowing case. To those who knew her, she was quiet, reserved, and unremarkable. Born in 1983, she grew up in a rural home in southern Worcester County, Massachusetts. Her parents, Kevin and Sharon Murray, were well regarded in their small community. Kevin worked as an auto mechanic, while Sharon, a homemaker, spent her days on crafts and caring for their children. Erika was the youngest of 3 siblings. Her early years were unassuming, filled with family barbecues, school events, and playing games with her older siblings. Teachers remembered her as bright and diligent, though her quiet demeanor often made her easy to overlook. During her teenage years, she became more self-conscious about her appearance, spending hours styling her hair and perfecting her makeup. By the time she graduated high school, she was seen as a responsible and goal-oriented young woman. Everything changed when she met Raymond Rivera at a local fast food restaurant where they both worked. Raymond, 7 years her senior, was charming yet rough around the edges. Their relationship started innocently enough but quickly grew intense. Friends would later describe Raymond as controlling, a trait that became more pronounced over time. By the time Erika discovered she was pregnant at 18, she was already deeply entwined in his world. Erika's first child, Kayla, was born shortly after her high school graduation in 2001. The young family moved in with her parents, and to outsiders they appeared to be a typical couple navigating the challenges of parenthood. But cracks soon began to show. By 2003, Erika was pregnant again, and the family relocated to Raymond's sister Christine's house in Blackstone. Over the next decade, their household expanded, but the seemingly idyllic facade masked a growing web of secrets. Neighbors described the family as private, even withdrawn. Erika rarely left the house while Raymond spent much of his time in the basement cultivating marijuana. Though the older children attended school and appeared well-adjusted, rumors began to swirl about the condition of their home. A postal worker noted the yard was overgrown and unkempt, accompanied by a persistent foul odor that she assumed was garbage. What no one could have anticipated was the nightmare unfolding behind closed doors. Erika had secretly given birth to at least 5 more children, each time concealing her pregnancies beneath baggy clothing. She avoided medical care entirely, delivering the babies alone in the bathroom while the rest of the household slept. Some of the children were raised in the filth of the home, while others, those who didn't survive, were hidden away, their tiny bodies abandoned in closets. When authorities confronted her, Erika appeared disturbingly detached. She admitted to the pregnancies and the deaths of the infants but claimed she had panicked, unable to cope. Her primary fear, she said, was that Raymond would leave her if he discovered the truth. This fear, coupled with her deteriorating mental health, pushed her into a cycle of secrecy and neglect. The revelation of Erika's double life shocked even the most seasoned investigators. How could a woman who once seemed so composed and responsible descend into such despair? And how had the community, the school system, and child services failed to see what was happening? The investigation. The police investigation into the Murray household began immediately after the initial discovery. What started as a welfare check on neglected children quickly escalated into a full-scale crime scene investigation. Within hours, the house was condemned as uninhabitable, and a hazmat team was called in to safely navigate the squalid environment. Investigators painstakingly cataloged every detail, from the piles of garbage to the remains discovered in the closets. The conditions inside the home were far worse than anyone had anticipated. Trash was stacked several feet high, maggots swarmed over food and diapers, and rodents roamed openly. The walls were smeared with human waste and handprints, a haunting testament to the children's futile attempts to find stability in their chaotic world. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and officers frequently stepped outside for fresh air, visibly shaken by the scene. The most disturbing discovery lay within the closets. In one, investigators found the remains of an infant wrapped in adult sweatpants. The umbilical cord and placenta still attached a grim indication the baby had been abandoned immediately after birth. 2 more sets of remains were found in a similar state of advanced decomposition. Forensic experts faced immense challenges determining the timeline and cause of death due to the deteriorated condition of the bodies. Outside, the media descended on Blackstone, turning the small town into a national focus. Neighbors expressed disbelief and guilt, questioning how such horrors could have gone undetected for so long. Some admitted noticing oddities: the smell, the boarded-up windows, the family's reclusive nature. A few recalled occasionally seeing children, but never imagined the true extent of the neglect. Meanwhile, authorities turned their attention to Erika. During initial interviews, she appeared unsettlingly calm, almost indifferent. She admitted to giving birth to the infants, but claimed she had kept their existence secret out of fear. When questioned about the remains, she maintained that 2 of the babies had been stillborn, while one had lived for a week before dying in her arms. Her explanation was chillingly simple. She panicked, wrapped the bodies, and placed them in the closets. Raymond Rivera, Erika's partner, was also questioned. He insisted he had no knowledge of the 2 younger girls being his daughters or of the infant remains in the house. Investigators found his claims difficult to believe. How could someone living in the same home fail to notice pregnancies or hear newborn cries? The basement, where Raymond spent much of his time cultivating marijuana, became a focal point for the investigation. Evidence of drug activity further complicated the case, leading to additional charges against him. Child Services records revealed yet another layer of failure. In 2007, the Department of Children and Families had received a report about the unsanitary conditions in the Murray home. An investigation followed, but no significant action was taken. The case was closed, leaving the family to spiral further into chaos. The surviving children were placed in protective custody and underwent medical evaluations, which painted a devastating picture. The 3-year-old girl was so malnourished she couldn't sit up without assistance and was hypersensitive to light, having spent most of her life in darkness. The 5-month-old had a flattened head from lying down for extended periods. Both lacked birth records, underscoring their hidden existence. The older children, aged 10 and 13, were found to have severe ear infections and infestations of maggots, evidence of prolonged neglect. Despite these conditions, they had been attending school and appeared relatively well adjusted, a striking contrast to the horrors within their home. The investigation raised as many questions as it answered. Why had Erika continued to have children in secret? What role did Raymond play in enabling or ignoring the abuse? And how had the system failed to intervene, even after prior warnings? The trial. The case against Erika Murray and Raymond Rivera drew widespread media attention as it proceeded to the courtroom. Erika faced multiple charges, including second-degree murder, assault and battery on a child causing substantial injury, child neglect, and animal cruelty. Raymond, meanwhile, was charged with child endangerment, drug-related offenses, and other minor counts tied to his role in the household. The prosecution painted Erika as a neglectful mother who knowingly subjected her children to unimaginable conditions. They argued that her repeated secrecy and refusal to seek medical care for her infants directly led to their deaths. Evidence from the home, including photographs of the filth and forensic analysis of the infant remains, was shown to the jury. The images of skeletal remains, dirty bottles swarming with maggots, and piles of soiled diapers cast a solemn pall over the courtroom. Witnesses, including Erika's neighbor, Betsy Brown, took the stand to recount their experiences. Betsy described the day she discovered the crying children, her voice breaking as she detailed the overwhelming stench and the sight of the malnourished girls. Other neighbors expressed guilt for not acting sooner, citing the smells and the home's neglected state, but admitting they had dismissed these signs as simple disorganization. Erika's defense team focused on her fragile mental state and the controlling nature of her relationship with Raymond. They argued she suffered from untreated postpartum depression and a personality disorder that impaired her ability to make sound decisions. Forensic psychologists testified that Erika was emotionally isolated and lived in fear of Raymond's reaction if he discovered her pregnancies. The defense claimed this fear, compounded by her deteriorating mental health, drove her into a destructive cycle of secrecy and neglect. Raymond's defense rested on denial. He claimed ignorance of the younger children and the home's conditions. His lawyers emphasized his frequent time spent in the basement and limited involvement in family affairs. Prosecutors, however, questioned the plausibility of his claims. How could a man living in the same house remain unaware of pregnancies or the presence of 2 young children? They suggested he had chosen to turn a blind eye, unwilling to confront the grim reality. The trial uncovered chilling details about the infants. Forensic reports indicated at least one of the babies had likely been born alive, but the advanced state of decomposition made it impossible to confirm definitively. This ambiguity ultimately worked in Erika's favor, as the lack of clear evidence meant prosecutors could not prove murder beyond a reasonable doubt. The courtroom atmosphere grew heavy during Erika's testimony. She described delivering the babies in the bathtub, alone and terrified, while her family slept. Her voice cracked as she recounted the baby she claimed had lived for a week. "She just stopped breathing," Erika murmured, her gaze fixed downward. "I didn't know what to do." Despite Erika's apparent remorse, prosecutors argued she had countless opportunities to seek help, but had chosen not to. They contended her actions or lack thereof were deliberate and calculated, motivated by a fear of judgment and abandonment. The verdict and sentencing. The trial stretched on for weeks, with the courtroom filled daily as the community sought both answers and justice. When the verdict was finally announced, it left many with conflicted emotions. Erika Murray was acquitted of the most serious charge, second-degree murder, due to insufficient evidence that the infants had been born alive or that their deaths were directly caused by her actions. However, she was found guilty of child neglect, assault and battery on a child causing substantial injury, and animal cruelty. The judge, while recognizing Erika's struggles with mental health, underscored the severity of her neglect and the irreversible harm inflicted on her children. During sentencing, Erika displayed little emotion, her face impassive as the judge detailed the suffering her actions had caused. She was sentenced to 6 to 8 years in prison, with credit for nearly 5 years already served. This made her eligible for parole within 2 to 3 years. Raymond Rivera, Erika's partner, reached a plea agreement with prosecutors. While the extent of his role in the neglect remained unclear, his drug activities and failure to safeguard the children were indisputable. He was sentenced to 3.5 years for assault and child endangerment, alongside probation terms that barred him from unsupervised contact with children under 10 and required mental health and substance abuse treatment. For many in the community, the sentences seemed inadequate. The deaths of the infants and the profound trauma endured by the surviving children felt deserving of harsher consequences. However, the absence of definitive evidence about the circumstances surrounding the infants' deaths left the court constrained. The judge remarked that while the case was undeniably tragic, the law required clear proof of intent or direct causation, which the prosecution had been unable to provide. The aftermath. The fallout from the case was profound, leaving deep scars on both the Murray family and the Blackstone community. Erika's surviving children faced a long and difficult road to recovery. The older two children, aged 10 and 13 at the time, were placed in the care of Raymond's family. They grappled with feelings of betrayal and confusion as they tried to process the reality of their mother's actions. The younger girls, aged 3 and 5 months, were initially placed in foster care. The 3-year-old, referred to as Liza by authorities, showed remarkable resilience, slowly regaining her strength and adapting to a safer environment. Reports painted her progress as hopeful, though conflicting accounts later emerged about the sisters' long-term placement. Some sources suggested they remained in foster care, while others indicated they were living with their paternal grandparents. The community of Blackstone, deeply shaken, searched for ways to heal. Vigils were held outside the now-demolished home, where neighbors left flowers, stuffed animals, and handwritten notes in memory of the children. Local leaders called for reforms to child welfare systems, urging more thorough investigations and follow-ups in cases where neglect was reported. The Department of Children and Families, DCF, faced harsh criticism for its failure to act in 2007 when concerns about the Murray home were first raised. An internal review uncovered systemic issues, such as understaffing and procedural gaps, that allowed the family situation to deteriorate unchecked. Advocates for child protection pushed for increased funding and improved training for caseworkers, aiming to prevent such tragedies in the future. Reflections. The House of Horrors case left behind far more questions than answers. How could a mother conceal 5 pregnancies while living with the remains of her children hidden in closets? Why had neighbors, family members, and authorities failed to notice the warning signs? And what role had mental illness and societal pressures played in Erika's descent into secrecy and neglect? Psychologists who studied the case pointed to a complex mix of factors: untreated postpartum depression, an overwhelming fear of abandonment, and a toxic, controlling relationship. Erika's actions were undeniably horrifying, yet they also revealed a woman trapped within her own mind, paralyzed by fear and unable to escape a destructive cycle of denial. Meanwhile, Raymond's role, whether as a complicit partner or a man willfully ignorant of the truth, remained a source of heated debate, leaving many to wonder if he had deliberately turned a blind eye to avoid confronting an unbearable reality. For the town of Blackstone, this case became a somber reminder of the power of vigilance and the importance of compassion. It highlighted the critical need for communities to look out for one another and for systems meant to protect the vulnerable to function effectively and be held accountable when they fail. In the end, Erika Murray's story was not just one of horror but of profound failure. Failure of a system, a community, and a family. It stood as a chilling lesson on the devastating consequences of silence and the necessity of speaking up when something feels amiss. If this story gripped you, don't forget to subscribe for more real-life mysteries and haunting tales that uncover the darkest truths.